Hello, welcome to my channel and thank you for being here. Today I'll be discussing two images that are one event, one extraordinary event in the series Unsettled, from the series Unsettled, which is the 100-year war of resistance by Xhosa against Boer and British. The images that I'm working off from this series here. Can never get the right. There we go. Unsettled, Cedric Nunn. And the caption for the first image reads KwaGompo, or Cove Rock, from which the warrior prophet Makhanda Ncele, Makhana, also known as Makhana, declared in 1816 that he would summon Xhosa ancestors to rise from the sea to help drive whites from the land, East London. So this site lies just to the west of East London, on the Eastern Cape. And this is the site of quite an extraordinary event that took place either in 1816 or 1815. The dates are a bit contested as to when it exactly had happened. And the central figure was Makhanda Ncele, who um, who has been an extraordinary figure in the early stages of this Eastern Cape War, 100-year war. And I've extracted information from this a book I highly recommend. Anybody interested in this history, The Return of Makhanda by Professor Julie Wells. And from where I've extracted most of the information that I know about Makhanda from. And so according to, Julie Wells in turn has relied heavily on the Xhosa historian Ezra Tisani for a lot of the information that she felt was factual. Of course, she's looked at a lot of other historians, but she has some unique insights into how the history of the Eastern Cape evolved and which history prevailed and which history could be deemed reliable, and history is a contested space. And I must say, at this point, a disclaimer that I am no historian. I'm a photographer who happened to become fascinated, deeply fascinated in this extraordinary historical event in which the Xhosa waged a 100-year, the Xhosa and the Khoi, to be completely factual. The Khoi were deeply involved in this 100-year war for the first 30 years alongside the Xhosa, and rose up again, another in the 1850s alongside the Xhosa, fighting the British. So it's an extraordinary history, one that's little told and little known, and that's the result of me trying to depict it pictorially in my project and book that I produced. So to come back to Makhanda, who was described as the quintessential by Tisani, as the quintessential freedom fighter, charismatic person, traditional spiritual practitioner who rose to extraordinary power and influence among Xhosa royalty, who also boldly claimed to be extending the pioneering work of the Reverend Johannes van der Kemp, who was sent out by the first person sent out by the London Missionary Society to introduce Christianity to the Amaxhosa and the Khoi, actually, as well, who Makhanda encountered and began his quest to understand the spiritual and philosophical underpinnings of this great threat that the Xhosa faced in these invading whites. First the Boers, and then the British, when the British annexed, which is a grand British euphemism for land grabbed, the Xhosa territory. So Chief Ndlambe accepted him as his closest advisor in political and military matters, which were blended with the spiritual dimension. So the interesting thing about this this prophecy that took place at KwaGompo Rock, which is a spiritual site for the Xhosa people, is that it took place within a few years of the grave injustice that was done to the Xhosa people in the 1812 ethnic cleansing of the Xhosa from the Zierveld, then named the Zierveld because there were Boers there already, by the Boers, by the British. Notably, the campaign was led by Colonel Graham, of whom Grahamstown is now named after, and the Xhosa were facing an existential threat in that they had lost thousands of Xhosa people. They'd been cleansed out of that region, pushed across the Ngqube River or the Fish River, and couldn't return on pain of death, and lost something like 25,000 head of cattle, which they'd taken as booty by the British. And so Makhanda gathered with the consent of the Xhosa people. I'm not so sure about Ncika, whether Ncika would have given him, King Ncika would have given him that permission, because there was discord between Ncika and the Ndlambe people and Makhanda, who was on the side of the Ndlambe people at that time. And so the Xhosa people were gathered to make an appeal to the ancestors, who were deemed, and I'll show, at this point, you'll see a closer up of this Gompo rock, a closer view of KwaGompo Cove Rock, known by the British and by contemporary white South Africa as Cove Rock in East London. And so the ancestors were the spirits of the ancestors were understood to be in this cauldron, foaming cauldron in this cove, and a whole series of events was meant to have transpired to indicate that the ancestors were going to come to the assistance of the Xhosa who were facing this existential threat. And it didn't transpire, and at that point already some Xhosa people were accusing Makhanda of being a fraud. Makhanda, in his defense, said, well, certain rituals hadn't been followed precisely by the people, therefore the ancestors clearly hadn't come to their assistance. So in the next talk that I'll do, the following one after this, I will talk about the battle of in as limited a way as I can, because I'm no deep. I don't have a deep historical understanding of all the intricacies of this history, and this is an invitation for you who might be interested to do your own research. I don't have, for instance, at this point in time, the extraordinary book Frontiers, Noel Mostad's book, that has a lot of that detail. And of course, there are other people, but as I struggle to buy these books. The few that I have, and I had access to books in the from the fellowship that I had, the Mellon Foundation Fellowship I had at Rose University, to research at that time, which was almost 10 years ago. So I don't have all that information at hand, but that battle took place in that huge battle of Amalinda took place between the Xhosa in October 1818, like 2 or 3 years after KwaGompo, the gathering in KwaGompo, and so the Xhosa, so uh, Makande was a commander in that war in Amalinda. So first he was a prophet and a seer, looking for spiritual assistance, but then he quickly turned to realism and realized that the Xhosa people needed to unite because King Ncika was seen as being too compromising with the British, too accommodating, and they needed to unite and face this formidable enemy that was an existential threat to their sovereignty. And and the extraordinary thing is that after Amalinda, which I also refer to later in my talks, was the Battle of um, Grahamstown in 1819, again led by Makanda, and and so there's a huge amount of information about Makanda. He was a central person. I mean, I'm told that um, the people that served time, ANC people that served time in Robben Island, in fact, referred to Robben Island as Makanda because he was one of the first political prisoners housed there after he voluntarily gave himself up after the Battle of Grahamstown a few months later, and was betrayed by the British, in fact, and interred, and extraordinary story of his attempted escape, which I'll talk about at some point later, um, and drowning, unfortunate, tragic drowning in that attempted escape. So, um, you know, he was considered, Makanda was considered one of the great prophets of the Xhosa nation. Um, and through his engagement in the in the War of 1819. That's the Battle of Grahamstown, where they besieged Grahamstown. And then there's Mlanjeni, the War of 1850 was another of these three prophets, and of course Nongqawuzi, the prophetess of the cattle killing movement, which started in 1856. So Makanda was described as, by people who saw him and knew him, independent people who saw him as striking in both appearance and demeanor. He was 6'2" to 4 inches, 6'2", or between 2 and 4 inches in height, and sturdily built. The interesting thing is that his father was a Xhosa, and his mother was from a Khoi background, Gona Khoi background. So he was an Inyanga, but also a counselor to the kings, and a commander of military forces. And I'm thankful to historians Gray de Villiers, a retired Fort Hare a historian who gave me his time, generously gave me his time in his home, and Jeff Perez, who's written an essay and overseen some of my my texts in this book, as well as Professor Julie Wells, who was now retired but was still the head of history department at Rose University and was of great assistance to me at the time. So, a bit of a long talk to introduce Makanda because he's such an extraordinary figure, and I'll be talking a bit more about him again in the future. And I'll end it here and say thank you for watching. More information on myself and my work can be found on my website, a link to which, including my blog and email address, can be found in the video description below. If you like this talk, remember to click the like button and press subscribe. It helps the channel grow.